Hello and welcome. My name is Jonathan Bennett, and this is Mastering Last Minute Interview Preparation. Let's dive right in. The purpose of this course is to ensure you use your precious time wisely, so you're as ready for the big interview as you can possibly be. It's easy when you're excited or anxious in anticipation of an interview to freeze up or maybe get lost in preparing all the wrong things. You can try and distract yourself or kind of completely ignore it just to pass the time. Well, this course is going to help you use your time efficiently and effectively. So first, let me say congratulations. You've landed the interview, but you've only got a short time to prep. So being prepared for an interview will help you succeed. Now, while nothing guarantees success, knowing what to prepare and how to most effectively use your time, well, that can make all the difference. That's what this short course is going to help you with. It's going to help you make wise choices by focusing on the right things so you can become as ready as you possibly can be for the big interview. So if I could just take a minute and tell you a little bit about why I've made this course and other courses like it. Many leaders, especially those who are closer to the start of their careers, can't easily access high-end executive coaching. I get it. And it's a part of my values and approach to find ways to provide affordable access to information like this. So these are the exact tools and techniques I use every day with my C-suite clients. And this is my way of ensuring that I can serve everyone that would like my support in a meaningful way. And I call my video courses Coaching Within Reach. If you enjoy it, please share it with friends and colleagues. And seriously, thanks for joining me here today. So what's the agenda? What are you going to learn? What's the curriculum here today? 5 points. First, how and why to focus on the basics first. This gets your mind clear and focused on what you need to achieve in this short amount of time before the interview. Second, I'm going to teach you the problem solution framework. Every job that is open is really a problem for an employer. And I'm going to help you understand how to position yourself as a solution to that employer's problem. Thirdly, how to forecast, 80% of the questions ahead of time. How to forecast 80% of the questions ahead of time. It might seem improbable, but it's actually possible to pretty much guess almost all the questions that you're going to be asked in an interview, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Fourthly, build your 4 power stories. I've got a framework that helps you convert everything that you've done in your career to date into powerful, emotionally resonant stories. And 5, we'll spend a little time on some pro tips, how to deal with second interviews if they come up, maybe negotiating your compensation package, and a few other frequently asked questions. And I'll just take a moment and tell you just a little bit about me. As I mentioned, my name is Jonathan Bennett, and I'm going to tell you a little story. You know how it's often lonely to be a leader? Like you can't tell your staff or you're bored all of your problems. You certainly can't tell your partner, your spouse, or your friends everything that's going on with you at work. There's only so much of your work stuff that they want to listen to. So where's a leader supposed to turn when they need expert advice or a confidant who's been there before? Well, that's me. That's what I do. First, I spend lots of time listening to leaders so I can find out what's really going on for them. And next, I ask deep questions so I can help them get really clear on the problems that they're trying to solve, the things that they're trying to create and build. And finally, I work with them on how to best make it all happen. I used to be a CEO, an entrepreneur. Now I'm a coach, an executive coach, and I sit on 2 independent corporate boards of directors. I'm also a dad and a husband. I live on a lake in Eastern Ontario. And it's my great pleasure to spend some time with you here today. And I hope we can get to know one another on social media and more directly in the weeks and months ahead. let's get a couple of myths out of the way right now around preparing for an interview. The first is that you can't even do it. You can't prepare for an interview. It's not true. Don't wing it. Prep shows. Hiring managers and boards, well, they want to see that you've prepared. And of course, it demonstrates your diligence and your due diligence. The second myth that I hear quite often is that a resume is really what matters the most. Look, a CV will get you in the door, but it's your interview where you get to be you. It's where you get to shine. A chance for you to show who you really are and make the case for why you're the right person for the job. And it demonstrates how you are exactly the solution to the problem for which they've been looking. And more on that soon. The third one is that the hiring manager already knows, who they're looking for. My answer to that is, maybe, but in my experience, it's really only often in a general sense. When you're a hiring manager, rarely will you find the perfect candidate. Mostly, you experience it as a series of trade-offs between many factors. And if you're working with a panel of colleagues, you tend to talk yourselves into your final choice together over the time that you spend with the candidates in the interview process. Fourthly, the myth is that only the most experienced or best qualified candidate will land the job, so kind of there's nothing you can do. The reality is that, in fact, it's one of the biggest myths out there. And there's many reasons why the most qualified person won't end up getting the job. And sometimes it's maybe they're not the right fit for the company culture. Maybe their salary expectations are out of line, or maybe they want aspects to the job that the employer can't offer. Maybe they're just simply not what the company was looking for. So don't worry if you feel that you're going up against candidates that are more qualified than you. Look instead for ways to show that you work well with others, that you're interested in training, in learning, in growing. And of course, the interviewer is going to be looking at everybody's experiences and qualifications, but they'll also be looking for somebody who is going to connect well with the workplace culture and make an important contribution. And for all you know, that's you. So I'm just going to jump off camera here for a couple slides as we dig into the content. So number one, let's make sure that we have the basics all lined up. So the who, what, when, where, and how of this organization that you are applying to. Make sure you can answer all of the straightforward questions, the easily discoverable information that exists on their website and or on the internet. So as you can see and follow along on the worksheet, be able to answer these basic questions. Who are their main customers, or who do they serve? Who are the leaders? What are their names and what are their roles? What products or services does this company sell or this organization offer? What size is this company or organization? Like, what's the number of staff, or how many customers do they typically serve in a given year? What's the financial size? How much do their products or services cost? How is the organization structured and or governed? Like, is it a non-profit or a for-profit, or is it a public sector organization? Is it private? And where do they sell or operate? Which markets? Is it online? Where are their physical locations, if they have them? Are they local? Are they global? And at the highest level, why do they exist? Spend some time reading their mission statement, their vision statement. Maybe they've got values or a purpose statement or some beliefs. Research on their website. Google them. Go on to LinkedIn. Look for annual reports or other corporate overviews that are posted on social media feeds. You want to understand as much as you can about how this organization presents itself at the most basic level to the world, how they operate, and if you can, where they're headed next. With this information in place, you're going to have a strong foundation on which to build all of your own thinking and your own answers to the questions that you'll be asked in the interview. So the second thing you're going to do as you think about prepping for this interview is to understand the problem solution framework. An open job is just a problem to which you need to be the solution. Here's how to think about it. If you've ever had to be a hiring manager yourself and you've had a vacant position, then you know what it's like. A vacant position is just a problem. There's work that needs to be done and nobody's doing it, or soon someone's going to leave and there'll be this vacancy and no work is getting done, or other people have to pick up the slack on the team. And then there's also the time it's going to take to get the new person up to speed. Basically, an open job is just a headache. Most people, when they're hiring, they just want the new person to be found and quickly, so they can plug that gap and solve the problem, and they can return to a fully staffed team and become as efficient as possible. So the job that you hope to land, to you it's a wonderful opportunity, but to the person hiring, it's an empty box on an org chart, and it's a problem that needs a solution. This is how to think about it. So the trick here is to understand how the hiring manager is seeing this situation. You need to look at your candidacy and you need to see yourself as a solution to their problem. The way you position yourself, your skills and experience needs to be within this problem solution context. Imagine the pain they are experiencing. Maybe the person who is in the role left abruptly, or there's been several people turn over in the role in a short amount of time. Or maybe the role's brand new because there's just been too much growth and there's too much pressure and work on everyone else in the team. Or even the previous person just retired after 25 years and they're leaving with all of this huge institutional knowledge. Whatever the situation is, it's not about you. This is their problem, and they're going to provide you clues. The clues will be in the job ad. It'll be in the job description. You can find clues on LinkedIn, like the previous person in the role is probably on LinkedIn. Do they have a new job? What did they write about this job in their description on their LinkedIn profile? In the questions they ask in the interview, they will also give you clues. And you need to be a bit of a sleuth, because figuring out the circumstances will help you position the best fit aspects of your own background, experience, and skills to address their pain. You are the solution to their problem. So, knowing that they have a problem, which is an open job, you have to position your own skills, background, and experience as the solution. There's 3 things you're going to do to prepare yourself to position yourself as the solution. The first is you're going to craft a value proposition for your own candidacy. And you're going to finish the following sentence. I help, and you're going to put in there, remove the pain they are likely experiencing by, and then you're going to talk about your skills, experience, background, so that a new pain-free state is achieved. I'm going to give you some examples of how to do this in the real world in just a sec. The second thing you're going to craft for yourself is a differentiator. In my last job, it was often said that I was the only one who could, and in brackets, solve the pain as you understand it of this open job, because I have, and then you put in your own skills and experience there. And finally, you're going to address some obvious objections that they may have to your candidacy. So while it's true that, and you'll insert a weakness or 2, I see this as actually an advantage because, and then you can reframe what some may look at as weaknesses into some strengths. So you're going to create for yourself on the worksheet a value proposition, a differentiator, and you're going to begin to address some obvious objections so you can bring them up in advance of them thinking it themselves. Let's look at some examples of how these could sound in real life. Okay, so let's look at a real-world example here. In this case, it's a marketing director. This person has done a whole bunch of sleuthing. They've read the job ad extremely carefully. They've gone online. They've looked on LinkedIn at the previous incumbent, and they've learned as much as they can about what they're assuming is the biggest pain points that this employer has because this job of marketing director is open. And so they're going to use their value proposition, their differentiator, and overcoming some initial objections as their way to position themselves as an excellent candidate. So what is this marketing director's value proposition? Well, here's their sentence that they've crafted. I help brands become discoverable by aligning SEO, content marketing, and sales goals so that we will retain more of our existing customers and attract the right new ones too. Now, they want to stand out from the other candidates who are applying, and so they have crafted themselves a differentiator. Here's how their differentiator sounds. Well, in my last job, it was often said that I was the only one who could talk to sales because I worked in direct sales in my formative years, and those lessons that I learned allow me to connect with sales because I get their world. Powerful, huh? And there's a few aspects to their candidacy that they perceive as weaknesses, and so they've written a statement here to help them overcome those potential objections. While it's true that I'm new to this sector, I see this actually as an advantage because I'll bring fresh eyes to your longer standing problems, and I can port over solutions that I've seen work in other sectors. So there we have it, the marketing director's value proposition, their differentiator, and their way of overcoming some potential objections. Let's take a look at a second example. This one is from the nonprofit sector. It's a nonprofit leader. They've crafted a value proposition, a differentiator, and some objections to overcome as a part of their preparation for their interview. So let's look at their value proposition. This person says, I have a strong track record of building relationships with funders and donors by leveraging my personal stories and stories of client successes so that we can reach them emotionally and they'll be ready to give their support when we ask. Nice. That's a powerful value proposition. The differentiator that this person has crafted goes like this. In my last job, it was often said that I was the only one who could manage through multiple crises because I have a background in journalism and public relations, and so I can see how the story will play out and what we need to do to pivot the strategy before things derail. Again, if that is the kind of potential pain that this new employer is facing, if they have crises in the works, then positioning themselves that way, this leader is making a very strong and powerful statement. And finally, they have some weaknesses that they imagine could be an issue for this new employer. And so they've written an overcome objection statement here. While it's true that your organization is much larger than my previous role, I actually see it as an advantage because I'm used to doing lots with a little, and I keep a sharp eye on expenses so we can ensure that we're effective and efficient. So there's this nonprofit leader's value proposition, their differentiator, and an objection. So the third thing you're going to do with your time as you're preparing to do your level best at this interview is you're going to play Guess the Question game. And I'm going to predict that you'll have at least an 80% accuracy. Remember, the questions that they're going to ask you in the interview will further illuminate the problems that they have. Of course, the questions that they ask will vary depending on many, many, many factors, including maybe the seniority of the role, the industry or the sector, the size of the organization, the maturity of the business. All of those things will obviously come into play. So I'm going to invite you to consider a few sentence stubs that will help you frame a question. The most common questions that you get in interviews start off with things like, tell us about a time when, or how would you deal with the following scenario, ... Now, it's not important that you guess the sentence stub part of the question exactly right, but it's good practice as you try to develop an answer for each of these common areas. So, what are the common areas, and why do I believe that you'll get an 80% on this test of guessing the questions? Because it's a finite world out there, and most jobs have aspects of most of these critical components of them in this list. So many job interviews will ask a question that revolves around financing. Maybe it's about budgeting. Maybe it's about sales and targets. Maybe it's about financial key performance indicators. Maybe if you're in the nonprofit sector, it's about fundraising. But almost any kind of leadership or management role will have some kind of financial question. So you want to be able to ask and answer a question around your experience and skills with managing money, with dealing with finances in whatever way it may affect your job. Tell us about a time when you managed finances for a department. How would you deal with the following scenario? You were under budget, or you were over budget, or you needed to raise X number of dollars. So you see how you start to be able to build a question around finance? The same goes with change. There's almost always a question about how you deal with change. Tell us about a time that you dealt with change in your team. Tell us about a time change affected you in the workplace. How would you deal with the following scenario? And then they describe a scenario that has change in it. So you need to ask and answer yourself a question about change. Look for your background, and in the next section, I'm going to help you how to frame up stories to answer these questions. But look to your background and your skills and your experience and how you might be able to deal with change. Often there is a question around team dynamics. Sometimes it comes out as conflict. Sometimes it comes around team building. Tell us about a time when you onboarded a new person to your team. Tell us about a time when a really high functioning team was undergoing a major project. How did you deal with it? Again, ask and answer yourself a question about change, about team dynamics, I should say. You'll often get questions about management style or a question about your experience as a manager. Many times you'll get a question about personal growth or personal development on the job. How do you stay fresh? How do you stay up on what's happening in your sector, in your industry? How do you go about learning and trying new things? Communications questions are a favorite of many interview panels. Tell us a bit about how you like to communicate. How do people around you experience your communication style? Tell us about a time when you communicated during a crisis. You'll often get a conflict question. How do you deal with conflict? Tell us about a time conflict happened in your workplace or in your team. The deepest kinds of questions you often get are domain or industry or expertise questions. So these are as varied as whatever job, whatever sector, whatever experience, whatever that you may be going for, or whatever your background is. And so it's difficult to unpack examples of what that could be for you. But if you start and you think of the highlights of your career, you'll be able to shape a story in the next section that will powerfully answer a question about your own technical expertise. And finally, almost always you get a question about your future. So where do you see yourself in 5 years? Tell us about what your career path could look like. How do you see this new job as being the next step in your career? So guessing the questions with about an 80% accuracy, if you go through for each of these and come up with a good answer that will be strong and anchored in your own skills and experience, will be an excellent use of your time as you prep for this big interview. Okay, so we've remembered to take a good look at focusing on the basics first. Then we learned about the problem solution framework and how to create a value proposition, a differentiator, and how to overcome some objections. Then we looked at how to forecast at least 80% of the questions ahead of time. Now we're going to build 4 power stories. One is going to be about finance or somehow about money. The second is going to be about change. The third is going to be about people management and or teams. And a fourth is going to be about success that you've had in your domain or within your subject matter expertise. These must all be relevant to this new job you want. Even if you happen to have a great success story, if you can't directly connect it to this new job and it doesn't show how you're going to be the solution to their problem, then it's the wrong story. Look at the job description again. What is it really saying? The questions they're going to ask you are foreshadowed in the job description. What themes do you see coming through? What stories can you create from your career successes that will match exactly what's in this job ad or job description? Why 4? Well, because these 4 are portable. Think of them as like books behind you on the shelf. You're going to get, as we already discovered, questions about money, questions about change, questions about people and teams, and questions about your own experience. We're going to package up 4 stories so when you're asked one of these types of questions, you're able to metaphorically reach behind you and pull out a pre-crafted story. So you're not rambling, you're not thinking on your feet, you're not trying to remember a story from 5 years ago. You're going to have shaped that in advance and it's going to be ready to go, polished and well thought through so it can make a really, really big impact on the folks that are doing the hiring. Now we're going to look at how to craft your story. As I mentioned, there's just nothing worse than rambling on. It's really stressful to be thinking on your feet, to try to remember the details of a project or the people involved when it occurred several years ago. You don't want to be doing that when you're in an interview. You can, as we already discussed, pretty much guess the kinds of questions that you are going to be asked. And because of that, you can forecast and decide ahead of time the stories that you want to tell that are going to best illustrate your expertise, skills, and experience. This is a framework for creating 4 stories that you can have on that figurative shelf behind you that you can reach for and pull out in a casual, authentic way, but that won't leave you scrambling in the interview itself. So crafting a story has 4 steps. Let me take you through each of the steps here. So step 1 is you describe a problem that you found when you first arrived at your previous role or when you were presented with a situation that needed a solution. Step 2 is you describe what you did to address it. You describe maybe how the people that were involved were feeling, how they were positively affected by your leadership or your management along the way. Step 3, you describe the lasting results or impacts or transformation that occurred. Try to use maybe a financial figure or a data point or some sort of measurable outcome like a percentage, because that's going to make it feel even more real to the people that are listening. And step 4, have some personal reflection. What did you learn? How did this whole situation impact you as a person? How are you changed? What did you learn? How did you grow? Okay, let me give you a couple of examples so you can see how storytelling can work in real life. One is from a human resources director and the other is from a chief operating officer. So let's look at storytelling from each of these two different perspectives. So step one, you'll recall, is we need to describe the problem that was found initially. So the human resources director starts by saying, well, when I first arrived, there was no formal onboarding process. New employees had to pretty much figure it out all alone. Now, step two is, what did you do to address it? Describe how the people involved were feeling, how they were positively affected along the way. So what happened next in this human resources director's onboarding story? Well, they say, well, first I met with managers and directors and I created a working group. And next we looked at what other organizations our size out there were doing. And so we customized something that fit our particular circumstances. And finally, we trialed it with 5 new staff and we asked for their feedback at the 1 month and 3 month marks. And then we tweaked it before we did a full rollout. Okay. So what about step 3 then? Describe the lasting results or impacts of this transformation. Try to use a financial figure or a data point, such as a percentage, right? So what did the human resources director go on to say? Well, they said, well, we were able to reduce our turnover rate at the 1 year mark by 15%. We also had an 83% satisfaction rate from employees that went through this orientation process. And step 4, you'll recall, is describe, what you learned. This is the personal reflection. So what did our HR director say? Well, they said, having gone through this orientation project, I learned that people resist new processes if they can't understand why they're being asked to implement it. So the earlier you can get them involved, the more buy-in there'll be. And I have used this lesson over and over again in my career since. Okay. So you can see how this story flowed through the 4 steps for this HR director and their orientation project. Let's do a second example and let's see how it plays out for our chief operating officer. So step 1, let's describe the problem. The chief operating officer says, well, when we bought the new company, both firms had completely different systems and ways of tracking inventory. That does sound like a big problem. So what was step 2? This is what this chief operating officer did to address it. Well, they said, getting these 2 systems aligned was a huge change management process. First, we involved all the teams across both the firms. Next, we met with existing vendors to see what options and opportunities there was for data integration and migration. And finally, we made a choice to all move to one of the 2 solutions. And we created learning groups across both companies so we could leverage existing knowledge on both sides and capture as many new use cases as we could. Okay. So step 3 was, what are the lasting results? So this chief operating officer goes on to say, this new system reduced our overall time to ship by 2 full days, and we could consolidate several jobs, and we ended up finding about 5% of efficiencies, which went right to the bottom line. And step 4 was, what did this person learn? So the chief operating officer reflects and says, I think I learned most through this process. The change is really hard for people, especially when they're the ones who are originally responsible for the thing that ended up getting changed. And I really found that I needed to be empathetic and patient because it's essential for these folks to come around and become champions for this new system again. Here's the most important part of the preparation that you're going to do. You've got to shape and write out your stories. You're not going to deliver your stories word for word. You're not going to memorize what you wrote, but you're going to make a series of choices and decisions around your stories that will stick with you when you're in the interview. And you'll tell an approximate version of what you wrote down because you're going to write it down and then you're going to practice it. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to write out each of your 4 stories. Make sure you've got all of the elements there. Next, you're going to practice telling them to someone. Maybe a friend, a partner, somebody that is in your world who is patient and can give you a little feedback on how to sharpen it and not ramble. Keep in mind that storytelling is a powerful way to answer questions. So here's a couple of ways that you might want to consider to transition into a story and insert one of your stories as an answer to a question that didn't specifically ask for a story. So let's say somebody says, can you tell us about change and some time in your career that change has happened? You could bridge that into a story by saying, that's a great question. It reminds me of a time when I was asked to step in and, right? So there's a little bridge there that you can create between the question and the story that you want to tell. Here's another one. I do have an example. Actually, let me tell you a brief story that illustrates my experience here. Let me tell you a brief story that illustrates my experience. Here's a third one. I think the best way I can communicate my answer is to tell you about a time when. So each of these three ways of bridging between a question and one of the stories that you've shaped help create intrigue and interest. It hopefully will come across as charming and thoughtful and will ingratiate you to the listeners. Most people can work in all four of the stories into their interview because the questions that asked are usually broad, and the stories, because they're in four broad categories, can almost always fit somewhere. So I assure you, by doing four, you'll use all four and it will fill up a good chunk of the interview all by itself. So let's recap on what we've learned so far. Firstly, we're going to focus on the basics, right? Who, what, when, where, and how of this organization. We really want to make sure we've got the foundational aspects of this company, this organization down pat, so we look like we're prepared and so that we can tailor our answers as specifically to their place in the market as possible. Next, remember the problem-solution framework. They have a problem. It's an open job. They're experiencing pain because this job is unfilled or it's about to be unfilled. And you need to present yourself as the solution. The skills and experience and background that you've got is going to be the solution to their open job problem. Thirdly, we can forecast probably 80% of the questions ahead of time. You're going to look through the list and make sure that you've got an answer for each in each of the categories and for each of the questions ahead of time. And 4, you're going to build your 4 power stories. We're almost towards the end here. Let's jump in and grab some pro tips, give some answers to some frequently asked questions. I recently did some work on LinkedIn on this, and I gathered up a whole bunch of the questions that came to me through that process. So let's try and deal with them here. First question that I get asked quite often is, what are some good questions to have ready to ask at the end of the interview? Well, hopefully you've asked a question or two along the way, and there's been a little bit of conversation as much as possible. Even though often interviews are very formally structured, it's always good to tuck questions in as you can along the way. But at the end, I always like questions that are future oriented. So if I was the successful candidate and we had an amazing first year, what kinds of things would you hope I will have achieved? Right? Where do you see the company's growth going over the course of the next 3 years? How does the organizational strategy affect this particular job going forward? How does this job that I'm going for contribute to the organization's strategy? So anything that's future oriented, I really like. It helps them imagine you in that role and contributing to the organization's next stages. Here's another question I often get. How bold should I be in expressing my interest in the job? The answer to this is it can be culturally different around the world, around how forthright that you could and should be in terms of expressing interest in the job. In the North American context, being clear about your interest in the job is, generally speaking, a good thing. I like a phrase that sounds something like, This has been a really wonderful experience. I've learned a lot. I would like to say at this point, I'm still very interested in this position. I know you've got some difficult choices ahead, but I really hope that I turn out to be the successful candidate. I'd love this job. Something like that sounds casual, warm, but clear that you're very interested is a good way to connect and let people know that if they were to choose you, you would be delighted and happy, and that will wash back nicely on them and how they feel. Often get asked, should I send a thank you email? I'm a proponent of yes here. Context specific, and for some situations it might not be appropriate. Generally speaking, though, a quick thank you email 24, 48 hours later that says, thank you so much. Wanted to reiterate my interest in the position. Please let me know if you have any other questions about my candidacy. I look forward to next steps is a perfectly good and strong and polite thing to do in my view. Some questions always come up around how do I prepare for a second round interview? Sometimes in some sectors, there's second, third, and fourth and more round interviews, and I'm not sure I feel very positively about processes that are that in depth. I think it unnecessarily drags out decision making and hiring, but many organizations, appropriately so, have a second round interview. These tend to be a little less formal, a little more conversational, a little more open-ended. They're trying to get a sense of the way you think. I think that if you didn't tell one of your 4 stories, making sure that you've got a story ready, maybe thinking up another 2 or 3 stories that you could tell would be a good prep for a second round interview. And making sure that you've got a number of good questions for them, because it's obviously getting pretty serious at this point, and you may be the successful candidate. How does one best negotiate an offer? There's certainly that question comes up all the time, and the easiest answer for me, I suppose, to say is it really depends. Obviously, there's a real move out there to put salary and the packages right in the job ad itself, and I'm a big proponent of that. I think it's really transparent and helpful when organizations do that. For some jobs and at some senior levels, obviously, that's not appropriate and wouldn't happen. I think if this is something that you need some real support with, reach out to folks that are in the industry to make sure that you're well benchmarked and that you know what an appropriate salary would be and an appropriate compensation package would be. Most organizations have a budget and have a number in mind. And so one thing you can do is to just say, I know what the marketplace and rate is for a position like this, and I know that you would have a budget for it, and I imagine we'll be able to come to an agreement. Just please make me an offer, and I'm sure we'll be in the right range. Leaving it to the employer to speak first is one strategy, and many people really like that strategy. In some cases, I'm in favor of it. Something that comes up quite a lot is, what happens when a recruiter or a hiring manager kind of ghosts you, which is to say, you send the follow-up email and you just never hear anything after an interview. I mean, other than it being really poor form and a bit hurtful and dispiriting, I would just say after a period of time, maybe a week of hearing nothing, I think it's safe to assume the worst, that, they've gone with somebody else and they've been too busy to get back to you. If it turns out they were just bogged down with work and they weren't able to get back to you and they end up getting back to you, if you're still open for the job and you still want to proceed, then you can. But, feeling stuck or hurt is never a positive headspace to get in. And so I just encourage you to kind of move on and keep going on with your job search as best you can. And sometimes, I get asked finally here, what if I'm considering 2 opportunities at the same time? And, to that I would say life often has a funny way of sorting those things out for you. I'm never a fan of using an offer at a new company to go back to your old company or old organization and try to leverage that for, let's say a raise or a promotion. To me, that feels like poor form and not very fair to the company that is hoping to hire you. So, good faith and ethics, I think, should always lead the way here. What I would say is that if you are, genuinely kind of got two really great offers, reach out to the folks in your life that give you counsel, that are good mentors, that help you make decisions, especially big ones in your life. And, pros and cons lists can often help and can often help make things kind of concrete. So there's some good answers and questions that come up. Hopefully some of those resonate for you. If I didn't quite get to the question that you were hoping I would get to, feel free to drop me an email and we can connect directly. So you don't have any time to waste. It's definitely time for you to get to work. So download that worksheet. Create a written draft for yourself, especially of your 4 stories, but also of your differentiator, your value proposition, and your objections that you need to overcome. Polish and practice it with a colleague or a friend or some family members, and try to enjoy this interview as an interesting life experience. Remember, it's just a conversation between you and some potential folks that you may work with, and they're interested in learning about you and what makes you tick and how you think, as much as they are understanding your skills and experience and how you're going to contribute. So go be you, go be authentic, go be real, and try to get as much joy and as much learning as you can, because each interview experience is a rich and new one. And I wish you so much success and so much luck. Please feel free to let me know how it goes and in what ways this prep helped you succeed. So I'm creating affordable courses like this all the time, so please check back in with me regularly. I work with leaders in 2 ways. As a coach and trusted advisor, I offer inexpensive groups a few times a year. So shoot me an email and get your name on the wait list, and please sign up for my newsletter. And I also work one-on-one with leaders and executives. This is the most intensive and powerful way I work with folks. I work with leaders that want to make huge gains, big transitions, who have thorny career and business problems. If this sounds like you, then please reach out and book a call so we can meet and learn more about one another. And from there, we can see if working together might be a fit. And as I said at the outset, most coaching and senior expertise is not within reach of many leaders, especially those who are closer to the start of their careers. So providing access to a course like this is my way of ensuring I can serve everyone, at least in some way. Let's stay in touch on LinkedIn. I'll connect with you if you send me a request. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for taking this course.